No matter how much you personally may or may not have read, one thing is almost for certain, and that is you've heard the name Charles Dickens. Not only was he the most famous of 19th century English novelists, he was world renowned in his own day, as well as in ours, for such great works as Oliver Twist, Great Expectations, A Tale of Two Cities, and of course, A Christmas Carol, which has shaped the West's conception of what Christmas should look like. However, in this raw and gritty realistic day, with our sophisticated demand for unemotional fact and brute representation of truth, a lot of criticism has come Dickens' way. People have heard that his characters are 2D caricatures, they're grotesques, he's long-winded, and worst of all, he's overly sentimental in his writing. Because of this sort of comment about Dickens from some critics, a lot of people are put off even reading him, or when they do read him, they come to him with a critical eye, looking for errors, looking for what the critics were talking about, rather than just going to his book. Now, there are two grave mistakes that people can make when reading Charles Dickens. The first is assuming they know what great literature is. That's for another topic altogether. The second is confusing the fact that his particular way of presenting things may not be your personal taste, and so we sort of sling it to one side. However, I want you to consider this. So vivid, so energetic and vibrant were Charles Dickens' works that we associate his name whenever we think of old Victorian London. When we think of crooked and slightly misshapen characterful houses, we think of cobbled alleyways with their twists and turns and hemmed in from both sides. When we think of larger than life, over colourful figures, we use the word Dickensian. I would go so far as to say that if you like Tim Burton, for instance, the filmmaker, I don't think Tim Burton's style would be there had it not been for Dickens coming long before. But Charles Dickens is far more than just the grandfather of the Christmas traditions in the English-speaking world, or the writer of great social epics. Dickens' works are so human, so deep, full of pathos and meaning, and yes, sentimental, whether we like it or not. But in this video, we're going to be diving in to how to read Dickens' books best. To go beyond just seeing a bunch of words, to actually feeling the story, which is what Dickens wrote it to do. To that end, what we're going to do first is we're going to sweep away two common, big misconceptions about Dickens. And once that's done, we'll have a clear groundwork for having the right mindset to go into Dickens. We're going to look at certain things to keep in mind when approaching his books that will help you get far more enjoyment out of them. So let's get the first misconception or objection a person may have to Dickens out of the way first. This is like sweeping the rubble and detritus that has sort of somehow caved in on our modern society about Dickens. That he is wordy. He's long-winded, a gas bag. Now it is true, Dickens was paid by the word for some of his works. But to imagine that that's the reason for his lengthy descriptions at times, for the length of his stories, is, well, to coin a Dickensian style phrase, canting humbug. It's so unthinking, and we'll show why in a minute. But the reason it's stated is because people have heard it. Oh, he was paid by the word, so he wrote much longer. They've picked it up because it seems plausible, and it then gives them the sense of being learned and have done their research. Oh yes, Dickens wrote such long words because blah, blah, blah. No, that's not true. Dickens' rich descriptions were there because he didn't just want to sketch a scene or paint a scene. He wanted to immerse his readers in a world. a fascinating world. A world of intrigue, of mystery, of potential, of vice, of virtue, of dreams and disaster. A world that was at the centre of the British Empire, London. Think back to those times. The majority of his readers lived elsewhere and never travelled in their life. They were too poor, or they were committed to their work so much they could never travel, but they'd heard of London, and it was a hub of activity and bustle and commerce. It also was full of, the vices which can take place in the incognito of a big city, and that fascinates people as well. And so Dickens drew that world for them to experience. They longed to see the colours, to smell the smells, to hear the sounds, to sense the mood and atmosphere of a London street scene, of a London market, or outside a London church where hundreds of people are jostling shoulder to shoulder. Street urchins are weaving in and out of the legs of people, pickpockets taking things, newspapers being sold, carriages and horses moving up and down, wagons, all these shops. They wanted to experience it. They also wanted to know what it was like to enter the twisting, winding, dark alleyways of London, the criminal underworld that barely a person would be safe going into unless they were permitted to. They wanted to be inside their rooms and houses of the wealthy, of the merchants, and of the vicious poor, as Dickens used to term it. And Dickens gave them that. But he gave it in such a vivid way, and characters so much larger, so that everyone could feel what it was like to be there. And his works have stood the test of time. Like I say, we still think of Victorian London often in terms of a Dickensian view because it's that impactful. His works, each serialised form that came out, was awaited by hundreds of thousands of people. They were yearning to get the next bit of the story. Just like we want to binge on a Netflix box set, so did they back then. Now, do you really think that people who want to be entertained and feel this experience are going to put up with any author who writes 10 pages to describe a lamppost, as I once heard someone critique Dickens? No, they wouldn't. No more than we would allow 20 minutes of a film to focus on a lamppost. We'd be bored and we'd walk out. It takes 20 to 30 minutes to read 10 pages, so it's preposterous. It sounds plausible, but it is totally wrong. The thing is, today we can get a story through film and we can see the places. We've travelled to the places. We can see the outfits. We can see the characters, their mannerisms. In his day, people couldn't. And so what Dickens did was he painted it into the minds of his readers with a veritable festival of colour and energy and movement that honestly no author really, after or before, has come close to doing. He had a peculiar gift. So accept that first. Get the misconception out that he's wordy. If you read through, his descriptions are beautiful. They're brilliant and they never stop moving. And when you approach it in the style of someone reading back then, it makes the book so much more enjoyable and palatable to read. Take a look at this example of how Dickens describes a slum in London that most of his readers would never have seen and would not comprehend just how bad the conditions were. The name of the slum is Tom All Alone, a typically Dickensian name. But here's the description. Twice lately, there has been a crash and a cloud of dust like the springing of a mine in Tom All Alone's, and each time a house has fallen. These accidents have made a paragraph in the newspapers and have filled a bed or two in the nearest hospital. The gaps remain, and there are not unpopular lodgings among the rubbish. As several more houses are nearly ready to go, the next crash in Tom All Alone's may be expected to be a good one. So let's address the second erroneous misconception about Charles Dickens' works, which really is quite wrong and yet influences our approach negatively. And that is, he was so sentimental in his writing. Now, we're told that sentimental writing is not good writing. It's bad writing. But let me ask you this question. Who says so? And why is it? Now, I guarantee for the most people watching this video, they won't have an answer to that. So the follow-up question is, so why do you believe that sentimental writing is bad writing? It may not be to our taste. In fact, sentimental writing overall, especially if not done well, I don't particularly like. However, put it this way. Imagine a food critic who said, omelettes are bad food, bad cooking, because I don't like egg. Well, that's not a good reason, is it? And so, why should we judge sentimentality so hard in writing? It's more a product of our own society rather than anything inherently wrong with it. It's modernism's kick against the Romantics. So why did Dickens use sentimentality? It's because he wants you and me, and especially the people of his day, to feel and feel strongly. Dickens wants to jar your nerves. Dickens wants you to feel outrage at the legal system. Dickens wants you to break your heart over Tiny Tim and Joe the street sweeper in Bleak House. Dickens wants you to feel the triumph of good over evil, because he knows when you feel that, you get in touch with that primal, instinctive good in humans, it will move people to act. And at heart, Dickens was a reformer. Dickens wrote to give a voice to the unheard, to champion the oppressed. You know, we have no idea today just how bad it was back in Victorian times in the cities. You know, in Bleak House, when little Joe, the street sweeper, a boy, dies because of exposure and because he's not allowed to stop in one place to sleep because he's a tramp vagrant, Dickens wasn't lying. Now, if you had seen that, how would you feel? Dickens wanted people to see it, especially those in a position to do something. Infamously, it's said that Victoria, the Empress, she read Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist and said, is this really the case? That the poor live like this? We must do something. We don't know the horrors of debtor's prison, nor of the workhouse, the squalor that people lived in. And Dickens wanted people to see it, and he wanted people to change it. And that's why he used sentiment. He knew he had to reach the feeling heart. What I love about him is he uses sentiment so overtly. He doesn't try and disguise it. He says, this is what I've seen in the world. This is how I see. Come and see it with me. Come and experience and be the characters in the book. And I'll overblow it so that you can feel it more fully. Now, some, all sophisticated, will say, well, that's manipulation. Well, so what? Do you know, manipulation is not a dirty word. To manipulate just means to mold something to a shape. If you've ever agreed with a social movement, a social cause that's trying to change things, it's manipulation. They're just trying to manipulate the system for the good. You know, think of it this way. If you had a musician who wanted to bring beautiful music out of a violin, they would have to manipulate the strings. Because just dragging the bow back and forward au naturel, well, that wouldn't be pleasant to anyone. So when you go into Dickens and you see the sentimentality, embrace it. He wants you to feel. So fall back on it and enjoy the ride. We are creatures of sentiment. And Dickens didn't try and trick us. He said, let me show you how you should feel about what's going on. Just out of interest, I don't know if you know how bad it was in Victorian London. It was said, even then, that the conditions of the poor were sometimes lesser, most of the times equal, sometimes worse than the conditions of slaves in the colonies. Not many people know that. and Dickens wanted to shine a light on it. And to do that, he used sentiment. Take a look at this example of how Dickens uses sentiment to shame the ruling classes by bringing up the outrage of the living conditions of the poor in the slums. Again, talking of that slum Tom all alone, listen to this. After the government characters are constantly talking about what needs to be done for the poor and how generous we should be, Dickens says this: Tom only may and can, or shall and will, be reclaimed according to somebody's theory, but nobody's practice. It is a moot point whether Tom all alones be uglier by day or by night, but on the argument that the more that is seen of it, the more shocking it must be, and that no part of it left to the imagination is at all likely to be made so bad as the reality, day carries it. The day begins to break now, and in truth, it might be better for the national glory even that the sun should sometimes set upon the British dominions, than that it should ever rise upon so vile a wonder as Tom all alone. Now that we've swept the two biggest objections out of the way, that Dickens' descriptions have meaning and are actually brilliantly done, and that sentiment is a deliberate tool for a very noble and deliberate purpose, let's look at how to actually read Dickens. What mindset will help us to get the most out of it? Well, through all my years in reading, there's one thing I've come to learn about getting the most enjoyment and insight from books, and it's this. When you read a novel, read it from the author's perspective and not from your own preference. Gaily mount the wagon with them and let them take you on a journey in their way, narrating it in their own peculiar style. Try to see it how they see it. Withhold your own personal judgment and be determined to enjoy the ride. Granted, that does take some effort to accomplish. It takes some earnest endeavour, but oh, is it worth it? How much more you get out of a book when you choose to just sit back and accept and enjoy the style of the author, rather than thinking my style is the right one and the best one. And that's one of the ways to enjoy Dickens. And I'm going to give you an example now, which I hope will just let the scales fall from your eyes when it comes to approaching Dickens. Imagine you're going to a cinema to watch a musical film. Now, would you, when watching it, suddenly complain that this isn't real enough? This isn't true to life. Nobody gets up with choreographed song and dance to express how they feel. Brr, this film's rubbish. You wouldn't, would you? Because you went knowing it's a musical. On the other hand, if you've been invited to a film and your friend said, this film, oh, it's the most true to life, the most real, gritty depiction of World War I you have ever seen. And then when you're watching it, there's a chorus of corporals doing the can-can, or there's Motown going on in the officers' mess. Then you would have every right to feel aggrieved because you've been missold on what the film was meant to be. The same is true with writing books. The author comes at it with a style and we have a role as spectators. And so Dickens, when he comes at things larger than life, when he comes at it with sentiment, we're supposed to play the correct role as spectators. Get on the wagon with him and enjoy the ride as he narrates the way. Now, saying that, we're just going to look at three particular things that influence the way you can approach Charles Dickens. The first and maybe most important influence on Dickens, and this helps us to read him, is his childhood. See, Dickens was born into a middle-class family and he had a bit of a talent for writing in the early days. But his father squandered all of their money, frittered it away, and they ended up as a family in debtor's prison. An absolute awful institution, so degrading. Now, to help the family and to earn a pittance, Dickens was sent by his father to work at a blacking factory, otherwise known as a Japanning factory. And There he would stick labels on bottles all day, so monotonous. But this was also a filthy environment. It was a dark environment. It was exhausting. He could be made to work standing for 10 hours straight. And it's notorious that he had a very bad boss at times. And these experiences really scarred Dickens. He would never forget his childhood, and that had a massive influence on his writing later on. You think of characters like Pip in Great Expectations. You think of Oliver Twist. You think of Little Dorrit in Little Dorrit. You think of Floy in Dombey and Son. All of these take certain experiences from his life because he felt completely ashamed, betrayed, humiliated and abandoned. And Dickens never loses sight of the childhood. Do you know, so much did he get enamoured with the children and fighting their corner because of his own life. He got thousands of pieces of fan mail, but you know, he tried to write back to every child that wrote to him. He even let children make suggestions for the next instalment of his book. A notable example is something that happened in Nicholas Nickleby to do with schools and the bad headmaster and what should be done to him. You know, childhood was always on his mind. Now, this isn't just a case of saying, oh, here's a formative influence on his writing. It's more than that. Dickens had an uncanny ability to always remember what things look like from a child's eyes. The world just soaked into him at a young age. And to really understand a lot of Dickens, you need to switch on your inner child and understand that's the perspective he's writing from. Most of his novels will have some child whom the characters orbit. I think of Dombey and Son, which we've been quoting from. The story's not about young Joe, the street sweeper, but you know, he's the central character. Every character orbits on him, and we get to see many of the characters through Joe's eyes. Dickens always does this. Now, this explains why a lot of Dickens' characters are 2D, why they're caricatures, why they're grotesque, because it's the way a child sees them. They see them with such a moral intuition. You know, if a child sees a person with a big nose, they mention the big nose. If they've got a funny way of talking, the child mentions the funny way of talking. You know, but as we get older, we sort of act as if these things don't exist. But deep within us, we all know what it's like to be that child. We know exactly what's meant. And so for a child, most adults are larger than life. So when you read, switch on the inner child. Something else that it does, linked to his sentiment, is that kids often see adults much more clearly than adults do. And that's why there's such a stark contrast between villain and good guy. You know, the thin veneer of respectability is not impervious to a child who can see the bad behind a person. And likewise, no amount of ill looks or bad manners can stop the golden glow of goodness shining out from a character to a child. So when you read Dickens, always remember, you have to have your childhood eyes on, and suddenly his whole world takes on a totally new perspective. The second imperative detail you must bear in mind when reading Charles Dickens is that he was an avid theatre goer. He loved the theatre. He was an amateur dramatic performer himself. He wrote plays with some of the big names of the day, including the novelist Wilkie Collins, who he was close friends with. And he also would go and give live readings of his book, but it was called a performance reading because he used to practice in front of a full-length mirror his son recorded all the mannerisms and gestures and the voices of every character that he wrote and performed them for people. You just can't get away from the sense of the theatrical inside of his works. You know, coming down to even the cliffhangers at the end of every serialized piece. You know, there's a drama. He was a dramatist at heart. And so when we read a Dickens novel, we do well to conceive of it as a play, where he's peopled a stage with larger than life characters so they can fill the atmosphere of the auditorium and get that message right across. He fills his stories with drama, with grotesque characters like Fagin, and then you've got the miserly character, obviously, of Scrooge. Now this, again, may be a very big insight for you and may help you perceive Dickens in a different way, but one of the best ways to imagine Dickens' works is as pantomime. Now, if you went to watch a pantomime show at the theatre, would you go at it with a sense of realism and philosophical nuance and trying to get some philosophical thing explained to you? Well, no, you wouldn't. You expect the characters to be larger than life, and you expect to have fun. And that's what Dickens does. He does put a moral and a strong social message in his book, most of his books. But he wants you to enjoy it as well, because it's one of the best ways for it to sink in. And it's one of the best ways to make a stark comparison of things. You see, when he paints his characters in a pantomime way, it's known in classical literature as writing the humours. A humour is when a character, the character is a humour, is defined by a singular vice or a singular virtue, or is representative of a singular group or institution. Tulkinghorn represents the unbending cold law in Bleak House. Okay? But you know, you look at Fagin, he's a bad guy through and through. The Artful Dodger, he's a stereotype of street urchins and pickpockets. And that's how Dickens wants to put it across. Rather than get all of the nuance, he's painting a very dramatic picture for us to enjoy. And I think, going back to the comment I've already made, this may be the problem. People go to Dickens thinking great literature and then approach it thinking great literature is about realism. It's about deep, earnest thought. Now, if you go into Dickens thinking like that, it's going to be a tough read. So go into Dickens thinking of it somewhat like a pantomime. And who enjoys pantomimes and sees it clearly? It's the child. And Dickens just had an innate gift. Even though he tried to write realism towards the end of his career, he just couldn't escape from his astute observation and ability to pick out idiosyncrasies in people. The theatre had almost become him. There is no better way to illustrate the pantomime nature of Charles Dickens' works, and that he wants us to read it in a certain way, than by just looking at some of the names of his characters. Ebenezer Scrooge, Pleasant Riderhood, Dick Swiveller, the Reverend Melchizedek Howler, Uriah Heep, Charity Pecksniff, the teacher Wackford Squeers from Nicholas Nickleby, one of my personal favourites, the Bagnet family in Bleak House, who name their children after the places they were born. One's called Quebec, one's called Malta, but then we get the understanding of why one is called Woolwich Bagnet. Mr. Machokum Child, Decimus Tight Barnacle, Lady Deadlock, Sergeant Buzzfuzz, Uncle Pumblechook, Luke Honeythunder, Paul Sweedlepipe, Bob Cratchit, and the Small Weeds. So now we come to the third part of a mindset for approaching Charles Dickens' works that will help you really enjoy them, help you just to sit back and let him lead us along. And that is sentimentality. The thing people criticize for him, he wants you to embrace it. Some people will say sentimentality makes him too emotional or melodramatic, overkill, but he's doing it deliberately. So accept that. Go into the theatre expecting that, like a pantomime is full of very vivid emotions. The reason he did it is he wanted to move you and me and society powerfully. And goodness knows society today could still do with a lot of sentiment and feeling of emotion, especially compassion. You see, in his day, there was a strict structure in society. The haves and the have-nots. And the ruling classes and the academics, they viewed the poor as just statistics on paper to be moved around. Logically, they had lives, but of what value were their lives really? But Dickens, by using emotion and sentiment, humanises these people. He gives a voice to people who can't speak for themselves. He makes people who are higher up see them and see what it's like to be them. Now, if you were trying to do that, would you go about it with a certain technical briskness or a technical elegance? Would you try to use nuance and delicate twists and turns and subtle hints? You would use the contrast like in a pantomime, and that's what Dickens wants you and me to do. He says, drop the sophistication, drop the suavity, and be a human. To steal Ralph McTell's line, Dickens says, "Let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London. I'll show you something that will make you change your mind." When he brings a villain onto the stage, he wants us to boo and hiss. When someone threatens our protagonist, he wants us to call out, "Look behind you." When we see one of the other players come to the aid and defense of the protagonist, he wants us to clap and cheer and stamp our feet to celebrate the goodness over evil. Aye, there's the rub. He wants us to feel good. He wants us to see how much good is in us so that we can be good and do good. Now, wouldn't you say that is something the world even needs today? The next time you see or hold a book by Charles Dickens, please may I ask you to remember this: that you hold in your hand something extraordinary. You hold a story written by a man whose pen and sheer will became the conscience of an entire people, whose Atlas shoulders bent the cold iron sceptre of civilization 1 degree towards human kindness and compassion, and whose stories began a legacy of reform that saved literally thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of lives destined to be lost in poverty, hardship, and squalor. Judged by that criteria, Charles Dickens is a colossus in literature, dwarfing even Shakespeare. No wonder Tolstoy called him that great Christian writer. Charles Dickens was much more than a novelist. He was far more than a national or world treasure. He was a voice for millions of simple folk whom no one would listen to. He held the mirror that reflected the grotesque, callous indifference of the ruling and merchant classes back upon themselves. He was the hope that said, "Hold on," to those in brutal poverty. The champion of those the world didn't care for, the hero of the poor. And most of all, he was the guardian angel of abandoned, abused, and dying children.